My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 33 years old, and this is how I took revenge on the man who said I'd never be management material. I remember every detail of that meeting. The chill in the conference room, the stiff-backed chairs, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. It was my annual performance review, and I'd prepared for weeks, data pulled, metrics aligned, results laid out in neat, color-coded folders. I'd even worn the blazer my sister called my promotion jacket. I thought I was ready, but nothing could have prepared me for what came out of Mark's mouth. He didn't even glance at the papers I'd so carefully prepared. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and smirked. "Rachel," he said, in that smooth, patronizing voice I'd come to dread, "you're really great support staff. You keep the trains running. But leadership?" He laughed an actual, breathy laugh and glanced around the room like we were sharing some private joke. "Let's be real. You're better behind the scenes." I sat frozen, my hands clenched in my lap under the table. My throat tightened, but I forced myself not to flinch. The VP team for men who barely knew my name nodded vaguely or kept their eyes on their laptops. No one said a word. Not one person stood up for me. I felt humiliated, small, like I'd just been handed my ceiling. When I asked, voice shaking, what I needed to do for the senior project manager role I'd been chasing for 2 years, Mark waved it off like I was asking for something silly. "Rachel, not everyone's meant to lead. Some people are just support, and that's okay." I walked out of that room with my head high and my stomach on fire. Something broke in me that day, some small, hopeful part of me that thought hard work would be enough, that believed talent and loyalty and results would speak for themselves. But something else lit up in its place. A fuse, a quiet, burning promise. He thought I would disappear, that I'd stay exactly where he put me. He had no idea what was coming. I grew up in a tiny town in the Midwest, the kind of place with one grocery store, no stoplights, and neighbors who knew your business before you did. My mom raised me on her own, working 2 jobs, waitressing during the day and stocking shelves at night. She never complained. She just kept moving, kept going. Her favorite line, the one she drilled into me like gospel, was, "Don't wait for someone to pick. You pick yourself." I didn't always understand what she meant back then, but I never forgot it. After college, I packed everything I owned into the back of a used Honda and moved to the city. I didn't have a plan beyond working hard and proving myself. I landed an entry-level job at a mid-sized marketing firm called Stratix & Co. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I wasn't the loudest in the room or the one with flashy presentations, but I was the one who stayed late, fixed the spreadsheets, smoothed over client crises, and delivered when others dropped the ball. I became the person people relied on, the invisible glue. That's how I ended up under Greg Winters. Greg was the kind of boss who could charm a client into signing a deal they didn't need, then turn around and sneer at his staff for asking for a day off. He wore custom suits, golfed with the partners, and had a talent for making you feel like you owed him something, especially if you were a woman. The ones who laughed at his jokes or played dumb got invited to lunch meetings. The ones who didn't like me were sidelined, but I didn't care about lunch invites. I cared about results. Over 5 years, I poured myself into that job. I helped win 2 of our biggest clients, streamlined operations, mentored interns who later leapfrogged me in promotions, and more than once cleaned up Greg's messes without asking for credit. I told myself I was building something long-term, that loyalty would pay off. that someone, somewhere up the chain, would notice the quiet work I was doing. When the director of strategy role opened up, it felt like everything I'd worked for had finally aligned. I wasn't just the best candidate I had, in many ways, created the systems that role was responsible for. People in the office said, "It's yours, Rachel." Even Greg said, "You're on the short list," in that smug tone that meant he thought he was doing me a favor. I didn't network the way others did. I didn't schmooze, but I had numbers, client trust, and institutional memory. I truly believed that would be enough. I was wrong. When I walked into that performance review, I expected a conversation about vision and next steps. I had charts and projections, a roadmap for our biggest accounts, and a fresh strategy I'd stayed up all weekend to refine. Instead, I got a verbal pat on the head and a laugh in my face. Not leadership material. Great. Support staff. Better behind the scenes. Greg had no idea what he lit in me that day. He thought he was closing a door, but what he didn't realize was I'd already learned from my mother. You don't wait to be chosen. You choose yourself. And I was just getting started. The announcement came on a Thursday morning, slipped into the company newsletter between a reminder about parking permits and a catered lunch. Update. Jason Liu was the new director of strategy. Jason, who'd been at Stratix for all of 11 months. Jason, who still asked Rachel to explain acronyms during meetings. Jason, who spent more time golfing with Greg than managing clients. At first, Rachel thought it had to be a mistake, a placeholder, some internal reshuffling. But the moment Greg called her into his office with that syrupy tone, "Hey, Rachel, got a minute?" she knew he was going to make it sound like a kindness. Greg leaned back in his leather chair, laced his fingers behind his head, and said, "I know this might sting, but we think Jason brings a fresh energy to the team. You're steady, Rachel, reliable, but leadership, that takes edge, presence." He gave a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're great at what you do. Don't get me wrong. We just think you're better suited to a support role. Honestly, you should be proud of that. You're the kind of person who keeps the engine running." He paused, as if waiting for her to say thank you. When Rachel didn't speak, he added with a shrug, "Maybe smile a little more. You know, be a team player. People notice that kind of thing." That night, Rachel sat in her dark apartment, still in her work clothes, staring at the untouched takeout on the kitchen counter. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. Asterisk, "You forgot Mom's birthday call. Everything okay?" Asterisk, guilt stabbed at her chest. She'd missed birthdays, skipped holidays, let friendships fade, all because she believed it would be worth it. That one day, the sacrifices would be recognized. Instead, she was disposable, overlooked, told to smile more, like she was auditioning for a pageant, not running multi-million-dollar campaigns behind the scenes. She tried to fight back, scheduled a meeting with HR, armed with documentation, campaign results, emails, timelines. She explained how she'd trained Jason, how the client Jason was now managing had first signed under a pitch deck she created. But HR, polite and tight-lipped, nodded through her entire presentation and said Greg had full discretion over leadership appointments. Their advice: focus on what you do best, Rachel. You're valued. A week later, she discovered something worse. Over lunch with an old colleague in IT, Rachel casually mentioned the new client Stratix had landed, one of the biggest in the firm's history. Her friend frowned and said, "Didn't know Greg had a knack for digital strategy. His name was all over the file. Rachel froze. That pitch deck was hers. Every slide, every insight, every touch point. She'd spent 2 weeks building it from scratch. Greg had barely skimmed it, but now his name was the one attached to the success. And Jason? He wasn't just promoted, he'd been privately instructed to keep Rachel focused on execution, to not involve her in strategy meetings unless absolutely necessary. That was it. That was the moment Rachel stopped hoping the system would correct itself. She realized that hard work and patience weren't currency, they were camouflage. She could either keep playing fair and stay invisible, or she could flip the script. She didn't just want to be heard. She wanted control, influence, power. And she was going to take it even if she had to burn everything down to build her own table. Rachel didn't storm out. She didn't cause a scene or submit a resignation letter laced with truths no one wanted to hear. She stayed, quietly, watching. The moment she decided to stop playing fair, she shifted into a different mode, calculated, deliberate, invisible in all the ways that mattered. She smiled at meetings, nodded when Greg spoke over her, and took on extra work without complaint. But behind the calm exterior, she was building something. She started by documenting every shady invoice Greg signed off on, every inflated client expense justified with vague networking notes, every dinner with unnamed consultants that conveniently ended with 5-figure receipts charged to internal accounts. Rachel knew where to look. She'd been the one reconciling budgets for years. She started backing up files onto a private drive, printing hard copies, organizing them into categories: fraud, ethics violations, and conflict of interest. But it was the side hustle that made her pause. Greg had been discreet, but not discreet enough. Hidden behind a shell LLC, he'd been siphoning off leads and pitching to clients under a boutique firm he technically advised. He wasn't just stealing from Stratix. He was preparing a parachute for when it all burned down that night. Rachel poured herself into something else: education. She enrolled in online courses under an alias: business acquisition, equity structuring, funding models, intellectual property law. She devoured everything. When her friends asked where she'd been, she lied and said work was just crazy, which wasn't entirely untrue. Then came the call that changed everything. A former client, Gabe Levinson, someone Rachel had worked with during her 3rd year at Stratix. Back then, his brand was tiny. She'd helped him rework his entire launch strategy. And though Greg had swooped in to present the final pitch, Gabe had always made it a point to thank Rachel. Now, he was a startup millionaire, with a venture fund and a taste for high-stakes bets. When she reached out under the guise of grabbing coffee, he remembered everything. "You were the only reason that campaign worked," he said, leaning across the table. "Greg took the credit, but I always knew it was you." Rachel pitched him an idea, not a company, not a product, but a possibility. "What if," she said, "there was a team built not on politics, but actual talent, transparent leadership, scalable systems, creative freedom?" Gabe didn't blink. "If you're serious, I'll back it," he said. "Send me something concrete." That night, Rachel stayed up building a deck, not for Stratix, but for herself. And then she made 2 more calls, one to a corporate attorney and another to a business broker. She wasn't just going to start a new firm. She was going to take something Greg didn't even realize was slipping away. The building Stratix operated out of was an aging 6-story near the riverfront, once part of a gentrification push that never quite stuck. Through the business broker, Rachel discovered the building's owner was deep in debt and entertaining off-market offers. If she could secure it, she'd not only own a future office, she'd own Greg's roof. Using Gabe's investment fund as cover, she formed a new LLC, Merrow Holdings, and submitted a bid just under market. Quiet, discreet, strategic. While all this unfolded, Rachel kept playing her role. She fetched Greg's coffee, booked his travel, reviewed decks Jason had half finished, and pretended not to notice when she was left off internal emails. Every day, Greg grew more smug, more careless. One morning, she missed a team meeting because she was signing closing documents on the building. When she returned, Greg greeted her with his usual sarcasm. "See, Rachel, this is what I mean. Real leaders show up. That's why you'll never be more than my assistant." She smiled genuinely this time. "Noted," she said softly. She didn't need to defend herself anymore. She didn't need validation. Greg was too arrogant to notice she'd moved the chessboard while he was still playing checkers. Every insult, every dismissal, she filed them away. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because the time was coming, and when it did, she wouldn't just have receipts. She'd have the keys. It happened on a Monday just like she planned. The office buzzed with the usual hum of morning routines. Coffee brewing, keyboards clacking. Greg's voice echoing down the hallway as he barked instructions at the receptionist. But something felt different. The front doors had new signage. The lobby monitors flashed a new logo beneath the Stratix name. And then came the email sent to all staff at 8:01 a.m. sharp. *** subject. Ownership transition *** body. ***. Please join us in welcoming the new owner and operating partner of 1457 North Avenue, Ms. Rachel Monroe. Silence swept through the office like a tidal wave. People stared at their screens. Ray reading the message. Greg stormed out of his office, disbelief written across his face. Jason stood frozen in the hallway, half sipping his latte. HR was already on the phone, nervously whispering behind closed doors. And then Rachel arrived, walking through the front entrance in a navy-tailored suit and soft gray heels, her stride unhurried, her gaze calm. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just moved like someone who belonged there. Because now, she did. Greg tried to intercept her before she reached the conference room. "What the hell is this?" he hissed. "Is this some kind of stunt?" Rachel didn't flinch. "No, Greg," she said simply. "This is business." At 8:30 sharp, she called an all-hands meeting. The staff, still in a daze, gathered in the main conference area. Rachel stood at the head of the room. No podium, no slides, just presence. The kind of presence Greg once said she lacked. "I won't take up much of your time," she began, her voice even. "As many of you know, this building was recently acquired by Merrow Holdings. What you may not know is that Merrow Holdings is owned and managed by me." A stunned hush fell over the room. "But that's not the only change," she continued. "Effective immediately, Stratix & Co. is entering a transitional audit period. Several financial discrepancies have been reported and submitted to the appropriate authorities, including wire transfers, off-book payments, and a pattern of client poaching traced to an external LLC connected to Greg Winters." Gasps. A few people turned toward Greg, who had gone pale. "All of the evidence, emails, invoices, account records has been reviewed and verified by a forensic audit team," she said. "I won't be suing Greg. That's not my concern. But as majority stakeholders, my investment partners and I have voted for his immediate removal from any leadership or decision-making position." Greg sputtered something, rage and panic. dancing across his face, but two legal representatives were already standing at the back of the room, along with building security. "You'll be escorted out today, Greg," Rachel said, without malice. "You may contact your attorney if you wish, but from this point forward, you're done." Greg tried to speak, to challenge her, but he couldn't get the words out. His voice cracked. The room didn't move. Then security stepped forward, and just like that, the man who once laughed in her face was walking out the door. His access badge already deactivated, Jason stood up, his face blotchy. I think I should resign." Rachel didn't stop him. She only nodded once. When the room settled, Rachel turned back to the rest of the staff. "We're entering a new era. One where merit matters. Where people are seen. Where no one is invisible." She paused, then looked directly at the stunned group before her. "This is what management material looks like." She didn't smile. She didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, Rachel barely recognized the life she was living, not because of the title on her door, but because of the peace in her chest. Becoming CEO wasn't the climax of her story. It was just the first page of a new chapter, one where she no longer asked for permission to lead, one where she finally stepped fully into the space she had always deserved. But the change wasn't just external. It ran deeper than that. She had stopped chasing validation. She no longer needed a seat at Greg's table, because she'd built her own. She spent her first month as CEO doing what no one expected: listening. She scheduled one-on-one meetings with every department, asked real questions, and actually heard the answers. Then she started making changes, not sweeping, performative ones, but meaningful ones. She rewrote leadership policies to center collaboration over ego. She reviewed performance metrics and realized how many women had been quietly outperforming their peers without recognition. Promotions followed, overdue, but finally real. She launched a mentorship program, pairing junior staff with executives, creating the kind of support system she wished she'd had when she first walked through those doors. And she made time, not just for others, but for herself. For the first time in over a decade, Rachel left work at 5. Not always, but often enough to remember that life existed beyond fluorescent lights and endless deadlines. She picked up hiking again, something she hadn't done since college. She reconnected with her sister, remembered birthdays, made Sunday dinners. She even started sleeping through the night. Number 3 a.m. anxiety jolts. No obsessive checking of Slack or email. Greg faded from her mind the way echoes do. Not forgotten, but no longer haunting. She didn't forgive him. Not really. He'd built his empire on silencing people like her, and she had no obligation to erase that truth. But she let go of the rage, because it no longer fueled her. It no longer needed to. The real win wasn't buying the building or taking the CEO title. It was the moment she stopped asking if she was enough. She had chosen herself. And now, she lived like it. Rachel stands in the center of her office, sun pouring through the windows, the skyline stretching behind her. She's not holding a clipboard or buried in emails. She's just still, present. She turns toward the camera, eyes steady, voice calm but charged with something deeper. Conviction earned through fire. "I used to think I had to be chosen," she says. "That if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet, kept my head down, someone would notice. Someone would tap me on the shoulder and say, 'Now you're ready.'" She lets the silence sit, just for a second. But here's the truth. She continues, her tone sharpening like a blade. Some people will never see your worth, not because it isn't there, but because they're terrified of it, of what it says about them, of what it might undo. She steps forward, closer now. No script, no performance, just the raw power of a woman who reclaimed her voice. So don't wait, she says, eyes locked in. Don't wait for a title. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait to be seen. Own the building. Own your story. Own your damn name. And then she smiles. Not for approval, not for effect, but because it's hers. Fade to black.